The Glass Tower's Lament. The 67th floor of the Meridian Tower had been abandoned for 3 years, ever since the weather patterns began to shift in ways that defied meteorological explanation. Sue Storm pressed her invisible palm against the rain-slicked window, watching the city below disappear into an unnatural fog that seemed to pulse with its own malevolent heartbeat. "The electromagnetic readings are off the charts," she whispered into her comm unit, her voice barely audible above the wind that howled through the building's steel skeleton. "Reed, are you getting this data?" Static crackled in response. The storm had severed all communication with the outside world 2 hours ago, leaving her stranded in this glass and steel tomb with something that should not exist. Sue had been investigating reports of impossible weather phenomena, hail the size of bowling balls falling upward, tornadoes that moved in perfect geometric patterns, rain that burned like acid but left no chemical residue. The trail had led her here, to this tower that pierced the sky like a needle threading through the fabric of reality itself. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. Her breath misted in the suddenly frigid air, and she could feel the moisture in the room crystallizing around her invisible form. Ice began to form on the windows in fractal patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if they contained some terrible mathematics that human minds weren't meant to comprehend. "So," a voice said behind her, each word carried on a gust of wind that tasted of ozone and ancient rain. "The little ghost finally shows herself." Sue spun around, her force field snapping into existence around her like a second skin. What she saw defied description, a figure that seemed to be composed entirely of weather, constantly shifting between states of matter. One moment it appeared to be a towering column of swirling mist, the next a crackling mass of electricity, shaped vaguely like a human form. Rain fell from its eyes, and when it spoke, thunder rolled from its throat. "What are you?" Sue demanded, though she suspected she already knew. The readings, the impossible phenomena, the way the very air seemed to bend around this entity. It was a weather elemental, but one more powerful than anything she'd encountered before. "I am the storm that never ends," it replied, and lightning flickered through its translucent form. "I am the hurricane that dreams of destroying continents, the blizzard that yearns to bury cities. I am what happens when the sky grows tired of being ignored." The elemental began to move toward her, and with each step, the weather in the room became more violent. Windows cracked under the pressure of sudden atmospheric changes. Papers scattered in tiny tornadoes that formed and dissipated at random. The very air became a weapon, pressing against Sue's force field with the weight of 1,000 storms. "The humans built this tower to scrape the sky," the elemental continued, its voice now a howling gale. "They thought they could pierce the heavens without consequence, but the sky remembers every insult, every violation, and now, through me, it seeks its revenge." Sue gritted her teeth, pouring more energy into her force field as hail began to batter against it from impossible angles. "If you want to talk about violations, let's discuss what you're doing to the atmosphere. The pressure differentials you're creating could collapse the entire weather system of the eastern seaboard." The elemental laughed, and the sound was like a tornado touching down in a cathedral. "You think small, invisible woman. I don't merely wish to disrupt your weather. I intend to become it. This tower is my conduit, my anchor point. From here I will spread across your world until every breath of air, every drop of rain, every flake of snow belongs to me." The battle began in earnest then. The elemental hurled bolts of lightning that Sue deflected with precisely angled force fields, redirecting the electrical energy back into the storm clouds that had begun to form inside the building itself. Rain lashed at her from every direction, each drop hitting her invisible barriers like a bullet. The wind howled with such fury that it began to warp the metal framework of the tower. "You cannot win," the elemental roared, summoning a miniature hurricane that filled the entire floor. "I am eternal. I am the first breath and the last sigh of your dying world." But Sue had been studying the creature as they fought, analyzing its patterns, its weaknesses. Weather elementals, she realized, were creatures of balance. They existed in the spaces between states, in the transitions from calm to storm, from order to chaos, and that meant they were vulnerable to disruption of that balance. She began to shift her tactics. Instead of simply defending against the elemental's attacks, she started to create pockets of absolute stillness within her force fields, dead zones where no air moved, no moisture existed, no electrical charge could form. These areas of perfect calm were anathema to the creature's nature. "What are you doing?" the elemental demanded, its form beginning to waver as Sue expanded these null zones. "Stop. Weather is about movement," Sue said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. It's about energy transfer, about the dance between pressure systems. But what happens when there's nowhere for that energy to go? She created a network of force fields throughout the room, each one containing a pocket of absolute vacuum. The elemental's form began to destabilize as its constituent weather patterns were pulled into these voids, unable to maintain coherence without the medium of air to move through. "You're destroying yourself," Sue continued, pressing her advantage. "A storm without air is just potential energy with nowhere to discharge. A wind without space to move through is just nothing." The elemental's roar of fury shook the entire building, but its voice was already growing weaker. Its form, once a towering column of pure weather, began to collapse in on itself as Sue's force fields drained away the very medium it needed to exist. "This is not possible," it gasped, its words now barely a whisper of wind. "I am eternal." "Nothing is eternal," Sue replied, though there was no triumph in her voice, only sadness. "Everything changes. That's the fundamental law of weather, and of existence itself." The elemental made one final desperate attempt to strike at her, summoning every remaining bit of its power into a focused blast of wind and lightning. But Sue was ready. She wrapped the attack in a sphere of her force field and compressed it, containing the storm's fury in a space no larger than a marble. For a moment, the sphere pulsed with incredible energy. All the rage and power of a dying god of weather compressed into a tiny point of light. Then, with a sound like a sigh, it winked out of existence. The silence that followed was deafening. The fog outside began to dissipate, revealing the lights of the city far below. The temperature returned to normal, and the impossible ice formations on the windows began to melt. Sue stood alone on the 67th floor, her force field still shimmering around her like a second skin. She could feel the weight of what she'd done, the responsibility of having destroyed something ancient and powerful, even if it had been necessary. Her comm unit crackled back to life. "Sue, Sue, are you there?" Reed's voice was tight with worry. "I'm here," she replied, allowing herself to become visible again. "The threat has been neutralized. What happened up there?" The readings went completely haywire, and then everything just stopped. Sue looked out at the city, where normal weather patterns were slowly reasserting themselves. People would wake up tomorrow and never know how close they'd come to living in a world where the very air itself was hostile to human life. "I'll explain when I get back," she said. "But Reed, we need to start monitoring atmospheric disturbances more carefully. What I fought tonight, it wasn't natural. It was something that our interference with the environment created. We built this tower to reach toward the sky, but we never considered what might be looking back." As she prepared to leave, Sue took one last look around the abandoned floor. The battle was over, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. If human activity could give birth to one weather elemental, what other forces might be stirring in the spaces between earth and sky? The elevator doors closed behind her with a soft chime that sounded almost like a lament. 66 floors below, the city went about its business, unaware that the very nature of weather itself had just been redefined in a battle fought in silence and secrecy above their heads. Sue Storm, the invisible woman, descended through the tower like a ghost, carrying with her the knowledge that some victories come at a cost that can only be measured in dreams of storms that will never come to pass. The glass tower stood sentinel against the night sky, its windows reflecting the stars like 1,000 watching eyes, and in the wind that whispered through its steel bones, some might have heard the faintest echo of a lament for powers lost and battles won through sacrifice rather than strength. The weather would be calm tomorrow. It would be calm for many tomorrows to come, but Sue Storm would always remember the price of that peace, and the terrible beauty of a storm that dreamed of becoming the world.